My sister changed our mother's will while I was lying in a hospital bed. Then my grandmother walked in carrying a folder she had kept hidden for 11 years. Before I get into it, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love knowing who's out there. And if you're new here, please subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this one. I was 31 years old and 3 weeks out of surgery when my life fell apart for the second time. The first time was the diagnosis. Ovarian cancer, stage 2, caught early enough to treat, but not early enough to ignore. I had spent 8 months working through chemotherapy at a clinic in Hamilton, Ontario, watching my hair fall out in clumps in the bathroom sink, eating crackers because nothing else stayed down, and telling myself that the hardest part was almost over. I believed that. I really did. The hardest part, it turned out, had nothing to do with the cancer at all. My sister, she's 4 years older than me, had always been the capable one. That was the word our family used. Capable. She handled things. She organized the Christmas dinners. She remembered everyone's birthdays. She was the one who sat beside our mother at every doctor's appointment after our father passed. When I got sick, she stepped in immediately. She drove me to treatments. She coordinated with my oncologist's office. She made sure my apartment in Burlington didn't flood when a pipe burst while I was staying with our mother during recovery. I was grateful. I told her so constantly. I had no reason not to trust her. That is the thing about betrayal that nobody tells you. It doesn't arrive wearing a warning sign. It arrives looking like love. 3 weeks after my surgery, still moving slowly and exhausted in ways I couldn't fully describe, I came back to our mother's house in Ancaster to collect some of my things. My sister was there. She seemed surprised to see me up and moving, which I took as concern at the time. She made tea. We sat at the kitchen table, where we had eaten 1,000 meals growing up. She told me our mother was doing well, that the home care nurse had been coming regularly, that everything was under control. She didn't mention the appointment she had scheduled with a lawyer the week before. She didn't mention the documents our mother had signed. And she certainly didn't mention that our grandmother's name had been removed from the list of people who needed to be consulted before any changes were made to the estate. I only found out because of a phone call I wasn't supposed to receive. My mother's longtime family lawyer, the one who had handled everything since my father died, had retired the previous year. His junior associate had taken over the files. She was young, maybe 26, and she made a mistake that changed everything. She called me by accident, thinking she was reaching my sister, and left a voicemail confirming the finalization of updated estate documents. She referenced a beneficiary change. She referenced a power of attorney that had been restructured. She left her callback number and hung up. I sat in my car outside a pharmacy on Wilson Street and listened to that message 4 times. The cold I felt had nothing to do with the November air. I didn't call my sister. I didn't call my mother. I went home, I sat on my couch with my hands in my lap, and I tried to think clearly. After everything my body had just been through, clarity was difficult. My mind kept offering me reasons why it might be innocent. A clerical update, a misunderstanding, an error in the voicemail itself. I wanted to believe any of those things. It would have been so much easier. But I had my father's practical mind. He used to say that the facts don't change because you're uncomfortable with them. So, I wrote down what I knew. The call. The timing. The words beneficiary change. And then I thought about the past 8 months, and I started noticing the things I had been too sick and too tired to question. The way my sister had offered to handle all the paperwork after my mother's mini-stroke in the spring. The way she had gently discouraged me from attending certain meetings with our mother's financial advisor, suggesting I needed rest. The way she had stopped mentioning our grandmother in conversation, even though before my diagnosis, the two of them had spoken every Sunday without fail. My grandmother lives 40 minutes outside of Guelph on a property she and my late grandfather bought in the 1970s. She is 79 years old and sharper than anyone I know. Our mother's family had always been close to her, but somewhere in the past 2 years that closeness had quietly eroded. My sister said our grandmother was getting forgetful. She said the drive was too far for our mother's health. She said it was simply one of those things that happen as families get older and lives get busy. I had believed her. I had been busy surviving. 3 days after the voicemail, I drove out to see my grandmother on my own. She met me at the door before I even knocked. She must have seen my car coming up the long gravel driveway. She took one look at my face and said, "Come in, I've been waiting for someone to come." We sat in her kitchen, which smells like cedar and the particular kind of coffee that only older homes seem to produce, and I told her about the voicemail. I told her about the beneficiary change. I told her I didn't know what had been altered or why, but that something felt deeply wrong. My grandmother listened without interrupting, which is rare for her. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I know. I've known for a while. I just didn't know how to reach you without your sister finding out. Those words landed in my chest like stones. She explained that she had been trying to contact me for months. Emails that went unanswered. A card that apparently never arrived. One phone call that my sister had intercepted by borrowing my mother's phone and responding on her behalf. My grandmother had been told I was too ill for outside contact and that she should communicate through my sister instead. She had accepted this, reluctantly, because she didn't want to cause me stress during treatment. But she had not stopped paying attention. What she told me over the next 2 hours rearranged everything. I thought I understood about my family. Our mother's estate, which included a home worth just under $1 million in today's Ancaster market, several RRSP accounts, and a small rental property our father had owned in Brantford, had been structured carefully when my father was alive. His will was thorough. He had accounted for both daughters equally. He had also included a clause specifying that our maternal grandmother be consulted as an independent witness in the event of any major changes to asset distribution after his death, to ensure nothing was done under pressure or confusion. That clause was what my sister had been working to remove, according to what my grandmother had pieced together through her own quiet channels. A conversation with my father's old lawyer before he retired, a letter she received from a family friend who worked in the same legal building, and her own careful reading of a document my mother had unknowingly described to her during a phone call. The updated will significantly reduced my share of the estate and reassigned control of the Brantford property to my sister outright. My mother had signed these changes during a period when she was adjusting to new medication for her blood pressure and was not, my grandmother believed, fully understanding what she was agreeing to. My grandmother had not done nothing. That was what moved me most. While I had been going through chemotherapy, while I had been sleeping 14 hours a day and losing weight and trying to keep my mind focused on surviving, my grandmother had been quietly gathering information. She had kept copies of letters. She had written down dates and phone conversations in a small notebook. She had contacted a legal clinic in Guelph to ask general questions without giving names. She had done all of this in her 70s, with her arthritic hands and her older laptop, because she had a feeling something was being built around me that I wouldn't be able to see. She got up from the kitchen table and came back carrying a folder. Inside were photocopies, handwritten notes, a printed email chain, and a letter from my father's original lawyer dated 6 months before he retired, which raised concerns about a request he had received to adjust the independent witness clause. He had refused. He had documented his refusal. And then he had retired and handed the file to someone much younger and much less familiar with our family's history. I sat at my grandmother's table until it was nearly dark outside. At some point she made soup, and I ate it without really noticing, because my mind was somewhere else entirely. I was thinking about my sister sitting across from me 3 weeks earlier, making tea, asking how I was feeling. I was thinking about every time she had offered to handle something so I could rest. I was thinking about how exhausted and grateful I had been, and how completely I had trusted her, and how that trust had been used as a door she could walk through while I wasn't looking. I stayed the night. I hadn't planned to, but my grandmother asked me to, and I didn't have the energy to drive home in the dark. In the morning, she made eggs and we sat together at the same table. She asked if I was going to be all right. I told her I didn't know yet. She said that was an honest answer and that she respected it. Then she said something I have thought about almost every day since. She said, "Your father built something careful for both of you. He thought about you even after he was gone. That's worth protecting." I drove back to Burlington, knowing I needed help that I couldn't ask anyone in my family for. I contacted a lawyer through the Law Society of Ontario's referral service. I was honest with her about everything. The voicemail, my grandmother's folder, the timing, my mother's medical state during the period the changes were made. She listened carefully and said that what I was describing, if accurate, raised serious concerns about undue influence over a vulnerable person, which is a recognized legal concept in Ontario estate law. She said the independent witness clause in my father's original will was significant. She said we should move carefully and document everything. I did not contact my sister. I did contact my mother. That conversation was the hardest thing I have done, harder than the chemotherapy, harder than waking up from surgery with tubes in my body and no sense of how much time had passed. My mother is not a bad person. She is a woman who had a mini stroke, who was grieving my father, who was watching one daughter go through cancer treatment, while the other one kept showing up and offering to handle everything. She had been afraid and overwhelmed, and she had leaned on the wrong person's guidance. When I explained what I had found, she went very quiet. Then she started crying. She said she hadn't understood everything she had signed. She said my sister had told her the changes were standard updates, routine things that any estate lawyer would recommend at their stage of life. She said she had trusted her because she was her daughter. I held her hand across the kitchen table and I told her I understood. I did understand. I was her daughter too, and I had trusted my sister for the same reason. Over the following weeks, things moved in ways I hadn't expected. My grandmother's folder, combined with the retired lawyer's documented refusal letter, gave us a foundation that a newer lawyer couldn't easily dismiss. The legal clinic my grandmother had originally contacted put us in touch with a senior estate litigation lawyer in Hamilton who had handled similar cases involving medication-related vulnerability and undue influence. She reviewed everything and confirmed what we had suspected: the timing of the changes, the removal of the independent witness clause, and the circumstances surrounding my mother's medical state. At the time of signing all raised significant flags. My sister found out that I had retained a lawyer. She called me. I did not answer. She called our mother. Our mother, to her credit, told her that she had questions of her own now, and that she needed time to understand what she had signed. For the first time, my sister encountered something she had not planned for. She had planned for my exhaustion. She had planned for my gratitude. She had planned for the way illness makes you defer to the people taking care of you. She had not planned for my grandmother. The weeks that followed were not clean or triumphant the way resolution looks in stories. There were tense conference calls and legal letters and one meeting at a neutral office in downtown Hamilton, where my sister sat across a boardroom table from me and barely looked up from the papers in front of her. She had a lawyer of her own. There were things said in that room that I will probably never fully set aside. She accused me of tearing our family apart. She said I was punishing her for everything she had done during my illness. She said I was ungrateful. I let her finish. Then I said clearly, and without raising my voice, that I was not interested in punishing anyone. I was interested in ensuring that our mother's wishes, her real wishes, made without confusion or outside pressure, were the ones that stood. I was interested in making sure that the person our father had trusted to be an independent witness was given the role he had intended for her. And I was interested in making sure that what happened to my mother, during a vulnerable period of her life, was not allowed to become the permanent record of what she had chosen. The estate documents were ultimately set aside and redrawn. My mother worked with an independent lawyer of her own choosing, one neither my sister nor I had any connection to. My grandmother was reinstated in her intended role. The Brantford property remained part of the shared estate as my father had originally outlined. It took 7 months from the first legal letter to the final signatures. My relationship with my sister did not survive it, at least not in the form it had taken before. We have spoken since, briefly, at family occasions. The conversations are polite and careful and they feel like walking across ice, both of us testing each step before we put our weight down. I don't know if that will change. Some days I think it might. Other days I think that what she was willing to do while I was lying in a hospital bed is not something that can be simply folded away. What did survive was something I hadn't expected to find. My grandmother and I talk on the phone every few days now. I drive out to see her most weekends when the roads are clear. She is teaching me to make the bread she used to make when my mother was young, a recipe she memorized decades ago and never wrote down. We sit in her kitchen and she tells me things about my father that I didn't know, small things, the kind of details that only someone who loved him for 30 years would remember. The way he used to bring her tomatoes from his garden every August. The time he drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to help her move furniture when my grandfather was ill. Last spring, I sat with her on the porch after lunch, watching the fields behind her property come back green after a long Ontario winter. She was telling me about a visit my mother had made when they were both much younger, before children, before mortgages, before everything that comes after. She laughed at something she remembered, a real laugh, the kind that takes over her whole face. I thought about how close I had come to never having this, to spending whatever years she has left at a polite distance, in separate corners of a family that had been quietly rearranged around me while I was sick. I thought about the folder she had kept, the notes, the letter she had held onto for years, because something told her it might matter someday. She had paid attention when no one else was watching. That is the thing I will carry with me longest. My daughter, she was born the following year, and yes, I did name her after my grandmother's middle name, which is Eleanor. My daughter will know her great-grandmother. She will know the bread recipe. She will know the story of the folder and the files and the winter drive and the porch and the green fields coming back. She will know that the people who love you don't always make the loudest noise. Sometimes they sit quietly in a farmhouse outside of Guelph, keeping records, waiting for the moment when you are finally ready to hear the truth. What would you have done if you were in my place? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story stayed with you, please subscribe. There are more stories here, and every single one of them is worth your time.